This news just broke this morning. Former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney has died at the age of 84.
Cheney died yesterday of complications of pneumonia and cardiac and vascular disease. He's known for being one of the most powerful and polarizing vice presidents and was also a leading advocate for the invasion of Iraq in 2003. So for more on Cheney's life and legacy, we're joined live this morning by CTV's U.S. political analyst, Eric Ham. Eric, appreciate your time this morning to talk more about Dick Cheney. As soon as you hear the name Dick Cheney, you start thinking back to, the post 9/11 era, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, things along those lines, the enhanced interrogation / torture. How do you think Dick Cheney is going to be remembered as he will be widely discussed over the next day or two?
He'll be remembered for just those things. He actually set the United States on a very, very dark path with two wars that eventually became deeply unpopular throughout the country. And in fact, that legacy in how the United States views war today actually harkens back to what we saw during that global war on terror, where the president led the United States into these two wars based on faulty information. We know that, of course, there was a massive push to move Colin Powell into actually providing that information at the United Nations. And also, while Dick Cheney was this very towering and influential force throughout Washington, it's amazing when you contrast that to the last years of his life, at one time being not only the most powerful figure in American politics and throughout government as a vice president, but to be pushed out as a result of the rise of Donald Trump and the epic battles that we saw take place in the back and forth between Dick Cheney and MAGA Donald Trump, and how the MAGA base then took over for many of these war hawks. And we still to this day see a lot of that fighting taking place as Donald Trump rails against what he saw as unjustified wars. And so this is going to be Dick Cheney's legacy, for good or for bad, even though, of course, we know that he was seen as, or was, a figure who reshaped and redefined the vice presidency because of the enormous power that he wielded, but also serving as a former congressman, as the defense secretary, and also his rise as chief of staff at a very, very young age. In fact, he was the youngest chief of staff until that time to former President Gerald Ford.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very impressive indeed in terms of his political career. And yeah, the famous "there were no weapons of mass destruction" line will be in our heads for a while. But talk about his influence as a vice president. That's pretty unusual, right? To wield so much power in that position. Why do you think he succeeded in that respect then?
Well, it was interesting because of his storied career throughout Washington, and because he held so many very powerful positions as White House chief of staff, as the defense secretary, as a former congressman. In fact, I interviewed Colin Powell one time, and he talked about his relationship with Dick Cheney when he served as the Joint Chief of Staff. And it was Dick Cheney who was the Secretary of Defense at that time, and how closely they worked together, and how Dick Cheney was someone who was, even at that time, just a magnificent strategic thinker. These are Colin Powell's own words about Dick Cheney. And so coming into the White House as the vice president, serving under a president who was very green, did not actually have the discipline, and certainly didn't understand the depth of the job, it allowed Dick Cheney enormous room to maneuver, because he knew how the bureaucracy of Washington works, and he was able to wield those levers of power in a way that, quite frankly, the White House wasn't able to comprehend at that time. And so he was someone who George W. Bush was willing to allow to basically drive the vehicle. And that's how he was able to expand his power for 8 years in Washington.
Yeah, he was kind of the ultimate insider indeed. That is CTV's U.S. political analyst, Eric Ham, on Dick Cheney this morning. Eric, appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.